healthcare ad that's overrated. Tom says you're losing your touch, the press is underused and not outdated. Killer public relations, marketing, and social media in healthcare requires making the right moves at the right time. Welcome to the Overrated and Underused Show. Here's your hosts, experienced marketers Jennings and Tom Testa, with special guest Adrian Stoner. Overrated and underused. The Overrated and Underused Show.
Today's episode is sponsored by HP, the leader in the world's most secure and manageable PCs. Learn more about HP's Healthcare Edition products at hp.com/go/healthcare/US. Well, Jen, we're back for another episode of Overrated and Underused. Last episode, we touched upon press releases versus opportunistic PR. So what do you think? Any final thoughts as we kind of recap what we discussed last time?
I mean, I definitely think, the high points of, press releases and choosing which announcements are really newsworthy to public audiences, to the media, which they're going to care about. And then opportunistic PR in the sense that tying your company's offerings into, the relevancy of what's happening around you in the industry and, in your communities is really important. We're recording this late March, so we're kind of in the midst of, a very serious pandemic, COVID-19, coronavirus. So we're in the throes of that. We're all, managing our businesses, our families, and just trying to navigate and see where we're going from here. So, certainly it's a hard time for us to be recording this episode, so we'll do our best. But yeah, we definitely want to first thank all of the healthcare workers and everybody that's on the front lines, and really send our thoughts out to anybody that's sick or ill, at risk, just kind of working through this pandemic. But yeah, we're trying to carry on as best we can.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we're not doctors. You're not going to hear medical advice on today's show. There's plenty of that everywhere. But to say we're not going to talk about it, would be tone deaf, because it's impacting us all across the board. And the work we do, whether you're doing it now remotely or still having to head into work, like you said, there's plenty of the folks on the front lines, those medical workers who were going in and day out. So it's been tough. We're all here. We were supposed to be all gathering in Orlando, right? Talking about positive stuff. We were getting there, that's why we were talking about, we had a couple of shows ago talked about event promotions and, even things like press releases. Everyone's gathering this up for HIMSS, and now, a lot of this has now gone on the back burner. So today, we're going to talk about in-person meetings versus virtual events. And a lot of that, it's timely, right? Because like you just said, Jennifer, a lot of folks now are having to go from, those in-person meetings, those, face-to-faces, even amongst your own colleagues, given the times.
Yeah. And there's certainly a lot of people that are impacted by this with their businesses or, but there are some that are continuing with their careers and trying to navigate how to do all that in a virtual environment. So we kind of shift our topic so that this show really is more relevant to the time that we're facing right now.
Exactly. So, without further ado, let's just dive into our topic. Let's try and see if we can help offer some, a fresh take here. Today's episode is going to be about in-person meetings versus virtual events. So let's dive into it.
Overrated.
So let's talk about how in-person meetings are overrated.
Yeah, I think by default, in-person meetings are now overrated. I think there was a lot of companies, always have that skepticism about the real value of these large conferences, in-person events. And the big downside is that they're expensive. I mean, the travel, the booth costs, the booth setup, the electricity, like everything that goes into these in-person events. And you really want to make sure that you're getting that value out of it. Now, it's really just forcing us to look at the other ways that we can connect with prospects and really conduct business and make those sales connections and sales deals. So the upside of this is that, we may learn a lot of new ways that are more cost effective to reach prospects.
But you know what, too, I think there's a couple things to on why even in person or some aspects of in-person meetings are overrated because, let's even think of things like connecting with people, right? Yeah, sure. Some folks love to be face-to-face, hand over the old business card and call it a day. Well, the great thing is we've even kind of moved away from needing that physical business card all the time. We have almost like a virtual business card with LinkedIn, right? So a lot of folks are even trying to make connections. You don't necessarily have to do it all the time in person. You can do it via LinkedIn. So I think there are a couple ways, even as you try and build relationships with prospects, with current colleagues in the industry, there's other ways to do that. But what I want to put you on the spot on, Jennifer.
Okay.
I know. I'm going to put you on the spot here. What do you think about the future of events? Do you think some of the smaller venues, some of the smaller events, this may impact them moving forward?
I mean, obviously, this is total speculation just on our part. Once we come out, the other side of this, things will be disrupted for a while. I think the in-person events, even the ones that are hosted later in the year, there's just so many unknowns at this point that it's hard to really know. So as a company, I probably wouldn't want to be making a ton of plans or new plans for events. I think I would just put more resources into, because a lot can change, and we really don't know. So and even if your company's confidence, even if you're willing to go to these events in the future, I don't know if the attendee rates are going to be as high as they were previously. I mean, there's a lot of unknowns. So I think it's just important for companies to, really look at the other ways that they can connect with people virtually.
I think now is a time where people are really going to reevaluate the significance, the value of these larger meetings, these in-person events and shows. I mean, we talked about this earlier too. I mean, just take HIMSS, for example, and how do people even measure booth traffic, right? So people say, well, people are coming by my booth. Are they here to really talk about, learn more about my product, learn more about who's being impacted by our product, or are they there for a good old tchotchke? Are they there for a super duper panner to win an iPad, right? So I think, I wonder, and that's why I asked you, is I wonder if, maybe we get into this as we talk about the virtual side of things, but some of these regional conferences, there are those that pull people in from all over, but what about HIMSS regional? What about regional HFMA events, things like that? Or because some of them may have to go virtual over the next year, is it going to be something that they decide is a good format to move forward or not? We don't know.
I definitely think in-person events force you to make new connections with people that you're outside of your already existing group. So I think there is some benefit, but I think you're right in that companies, attendees, everyone is just going to be more closely evaluating, the effectiveness, the cost, resources involved, everything that really goes into these. Because, just working through cancellations of events here recently, there's a lot of significant expenses that, were pretty much lost by a lot of exhibitors, like travel expenses. Those were in some cases not as bad, but electricity, internet, all these services that kind of go into these events on top of, all the time and everything. So just knowing, what's kind of riding on these events, I think people are going to prioritize them, and maybe, conferences just aren't the go-to in the foreseeable future. Maybe, I think there's still going to be plenty of events that are happening, but they may be more consolidated. So, versus 10 different regional events, associations may start just hosting, one larger event, or who knows how everything will kind of shake out. I think there's always been that side of the fence where, some people are just really adamant about the value that, these face-to-face opportunities bring. And I definitely agree with that side of it. But I just think in these times, it's almost forcing us to look at other ways and see how we can best optimize, these virtual events or other digital means, or just, different outreach means versus the in-person handshakes and business cards exchange.
One other thing that I would want to bring up here, since we're talking about in-person meetings and how they're overrated, I think that, and if you agree or not with me, but I think one area that they're overrated is when you talk about journalists, right? In meetings with journalists. Back 1,000 years ago, I still remember, desk signs with journalists. There was value. Okay, we're going to bring either myself, I would go down and, talk to a journalist at at their office.
Did you walk through the snow uphill both ways?
I did. And when my horse just gave up, I would just have to just let it go and just continue on from there. You know what? No, Jennifer. We actually would go to these places called newsrooms where these reporters would gather. And there was a value of, for some reason, being there in person. But you know what? Today, a lot of these press are actually working remotely themselves, from the freelancers that these are, as the newsrooms have been shrinking. And I know that's another topic for another day, but, they're hiring more freelancers. So there really isn't a newsroom, and a lot of media relations is really 95% of it is virtual now. So I think that's where those kind of meetings with the press, I think, are overrated, and they will, they're going to just keep plowing through as we get into the virtual side thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's one case where, that whole, at one point there was value. There was, that was the kind of the norm, in that there was these face-to-face interactions, relationships, and then it's really just shifted to, how do you connect with those reporters and journalists virtually via email or phone, without the whining and dining of being desk side with them. So there's a lot of remote workers. Everybody's not based in the same city, so it's, we're all kind of spread across the country. So it's definitely a point to develop those relationships. That's one case where it's worked out well. I think, maybe that will be the case for the in-person conferences, where we realize that it can be done another way. Like, we can be just as effective virtually. And I hope that's the case.
Yeah. My fear is just, or my hope is that we just don't break the internet. I think getting 50,000 people online. I've already seen things get a little wonky, it seems, and I'm blaming it on the fact that millions are working from home.
If you are just tuning in, you're listening to Overrated and Underused. And today's episode is sponsored by HP, the leader in the world's most secure and manageable PCs. Learn more about HP's Healthcare Edition products at hp.com/go/healthcare/US. And be sure to follow the company on Twitter at HP. Yeah, Tom, so I think we've kind of exhausted the talking about the unknowns and talking in circles about, all our theories of where things go. So I'll be, definitely interested to see what that holds, in the meantime. And I think virtual events are underused. But will largely become widely used. The cancellation of HIMSS was a rough one for us. 1,300 exhibitors that were going to that conference. I think it was 7 of our 9 clients were scheduled to be on site. So it was a huge impact to us, and I think to the whole industry, especially, kind of at the 11th hour. We're still kind of navigating all of that.
We knew kind of it might be heading in one direction, and then overnight it was just, that was it. The rug was pulled out from under all of us. So it was a tough one. What I do think is, we've heard this a lot around our agency. So we took those lemons and we tried to make lemonade, right? So because of the prep time, although it wasn't going to be in person, it was still a lot of valuable information that we were ready to share with folks. So I think it might be a good time to talk about kind of the stuff we did if you want to get into that.
Just in our examples, and I know there's plenty of things that other companies did or were doing, and there was a lot of unknowns and people trying to figure things out, like the cancellation and how are they really going to leverage all the work and everything that's been into it. So, a lot of what we did consisted of, rescheduling sales meetings to be virtual demos. We had, several clients that had, HIMSS educational speaking opportunities. So on top of the HIMSS digital conference that they're still working on doing at this point, taking that content and figuring out how we can really make those virtual webinars or virtual YouTube presentations so that, that educational content that really was going to be valuable to the HIMSS audience doesn't necessarily just go to waste.
Right. Yeah, we had one of our clients, they had a customer who was going to be giving a speaking session there. So what's great to see is, that was months of prep and going into that. So it's good to see that HIMSS, I believe, is going to be turning a lot of those into virtual events.
Yeah. And I think, certainly there's plenty of attendees and people that were going to be at HIMSS that their priorities are focused elsewhere, and understandably. So educational, learning may not be at the top of their to-do list, but, having on-demand content available for those that are, and, are kind of continuing, as best that they can in this environment, I think is important.
Absolutely. HIMSS is an opportunity not just to connect with colleagues and potentially make sales and things like that, but also to connect with the press, as you know.
Right. Yeah. And I think for that, the editorial side and the meetings with the press on site, HIMSS and those in-person meetings are the exception to the normal business operation. Right. Like we're the phone interviews and the phone, meetings are basically the norm the other 51 weeks of the year. So, yeah. So, I think, with all that and, most companies are just really trying to navigate in how they, operate either virtually or, through other means, because just trying to leverage the content and the work that was being done. So, virtual webinars, town halls, panels, other events, I think can definitely be impactful as you're, looking to capture more quality leads. And with everything being virtual, there's always the need to almost compete for attention of the attendees and your prospects. The biggest driver of a successful event is the content and the topic and the speakers. That's never going to change. So if it's strictly putting on a promotional product video, you really can't expect, unless they're actual qualified customers that have asked for a demo, you really want it to be educational. Some tips for companies as they're looking at these virtual type of events is, picking a quality platform, understanding how to use that platform, and having dry run-throughs so that your presentation, when it does come live, you've worked through a lot of the kinks and the technical difficulties, and so that it can just run smoothly and be a good experience for attendees.
Yeah, no, you're right. You want to do a dry run just as you would an in-person session too. You wouldn't just kind of jump into your slides. I think another tip would be ensure that you do have some great planning. The planning and design of your slides are crucial, because it becomes the face of your presentation, of your event. So that's why spend time on messaging. This is going to be crucial. This is something that, again, we could have a whole other show on developing, messages, but this is your one shot. And sometimes if you're doing things virtually, you lose out on the conversational aspect to go back and kind of reassure folks. So make sure your messaging is clear, concise, and consistent.
Really another great tip would be to look outside of your company, look for unbiased experts and industry leaders that are really focused on the pain points and the topics that you're wanting to cover, so that this really does add educational value to your audience, so that it doesn't just come off as a sales pitch.
And those same unbiased experts and thought leaders can also make for great moderators as well.
You can also look at different media partners and publications and how they could help in promoting your events. Pretty much most publications do some form of sponsored webinar, sponsored content, because I think they can definitely drive registrations.
Yeah, no, and the great thing about that is most of the publications that offer these sponsored pieces, these sponsored webinars or virtual events, they're the same publications that a lot of folks are targeting for coverage. So it's great. There's not always room to get, coverage in one of these publications like Healthcare IT News or, Modern Healthcare, things like that, or even, our very own sponsor here, Healthcare Now Radio. They do, there's also virtual opportunities with them as well. So I think, again, it's kind of getting exposure in these same publications that you would try and get on the earned media side.
Honestly, with everything that you do, you really want to leverage it, making sure you record the event and save that, on your website and share with your contacts and your YouTube page. You can be live tweeting on your Twitter, social platforms, on top of the heavy promotion before and after the event. So I'm excited to see a lot more companies doing virtual events. And, I'd love to have the same conversation a year from now and really talk about, examples of what we've seen in very successful events. A lot of what we've said here are things that we've seen now, but I just think companies may get even more creative beyond this to kind of break through the virtual noise, so to speak.
Yeah, no. And so, I mean, those are just our tips, but, I think it'd be great also to hear from our listeners if you have your own tips. I mean, what are you folks doing? Everyone's got their own unique situation. So feel free. I mean, email us or tweet us, Jen_Jennings, Tom_Testa, Adrian_Stoner. Use that hashtag #OverUnderRadio. Share what you're doing with your clients or yourself.
Yeah, definitely.
All right,
so now I think it's time to get into Clinicians Corner.
Clinicians Corner.
A lot of what we talk about throughout the episodes revolve around our healthcare technology clients, or healthcare clients and corporations.
What we try and do with Clinicians Corner, we kind of take the bigger topic of the show and we're really tailoring it down to, how clinicians can use it on the individual, the practice levels. And, we talk about how the marketers can use it in the first, 20 minutes of our show, whatnot. But now we're boiling it down to kind of get real specific for clinicians. We talked about in-person versus virtual. So same thing goes for clinicians, right? They have in-person meetings, they have virtual events to choose from for their education. But another obvious equivalent to this is, making that in-person versus virtual comparison when it comes down to clinicians is the whole traditional care versus, let's say, telehealth options. And telehealth, as we know, given the COVID situation, has become real front and center. It's not necessarily a new technology, but one that is really jumping to the front of the headlines because it allows us, a lot of companies to, quote unquote, help flatten the curve, because now you can triage, you can interact with patients, get symptoms all via a telehealth option. So, in fact, most states now have facilitated reimbursement with those hospitals and medical practices turning to virtual or telehealth right now. So again, there are times where you need to see a doctor, and a lot of local physicians understand that. But I think telehealth is a great way to also onboard a lot of patients too, getting their medical information, getting it all entered into the system. And what they're able to do is do this really all via safe, secure texting is what a lot of these telehealth companies are offering to providers. It reduces exposure to patients who have non-critical issues. So I think that's kind of the big thing right now as we try and flatten that curve. We talked about how telehealth, the virtual side of care right now, is helping really keep those who may not have serious conditions or may not have, something like COVID, kind of giving them the care they need at home right now.
Like you said, telehealth is not by any means a new thing, but I think the current situation is forcing companies to more closely explore these type of options and the benefits that they really offer. But, certainly we're not the experts on telehealth. So I would encourage everybody to check out our favorite telehealth radio program for clinicians that is on Healthcare Now Radio. It's on this station, called Talkin' Telehealth, airs weekdays at 11 a.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern. Hosts Kathy Ford and Erica Grau go through all the hot topics around telehealth in the U.S. So they are much more educated on this than we are, but I agree. I'm, for the clinician's perspective, I'm excited to see the offerings and what this actually means for a lot of practices.
Inbox with Adrian.
Welcome back to Inbox with Adrian. You over and under groupies haven't been doing your job and sending me emails or sliding into my DMs. Surely some of you healthcare marketers out there must have some challenging questions for us, or maybe it's not a question. You just need to tell Jennifer and Tom why they've been completely wrong about something. No, I'm just kidding. In the meantime, I guess we can talk about something that has been trending recently and a lot of our clients have been doing. But what are some ways that we can leverage social media to drive virtual events? Let's just talk about live tweeting and virtual events on social media, because that is the way it's going now. We don't know what our future is. We don't know if we will be having any more conferences within the next 6 months. So virtual is where to go. So when you're preparing to live tweet for your virtual webinar, event, whatever it may be, you want to compile all of your information and you want to have it ready to use. So when you promote it, everyone is fully prepared. They know what type of webinar or virtual event it's going to be. be. They want to know the information, how it applies to them, what time is it going to be, what time zone will it be. All of these things are very important to your virtual event. You also want to have hashtags to go along with it. If you are discussing reimbursement, you want to make sure that you are hashtagging reimbursement virtual webinar, if that's going to be the title of it. That way people can follow along with it. They can see what's being said about it in the days to come. Hopefully they'll get FOMO and join. So let's talk about tips for live tweeting your virtual webinar event. When you're listening to the webinar and you're doing your live tweets, you want to take the information that you gravitate towards, that really sticks out to you, that you feel like other people want to know about and that they are already discussing. And when you create your tweet, you want to condense their words to fit into your characters on Twitter, of course, while using your relevant hashtag.
Yeah, I mean, and I was just checking the hello@andersoni.com email inbox, and I just got this email from a very interested listener, air quotes, my mother. So, Adrian, when should we start to promote a virtual event? How long out? And give us some tips for ways we can promote things on social media.
The more information that you can put out on social media before the event and get others talking about it, the more likely you are to have a larger audience. I usually try to start a month out, but sometimes that just doesn't always happen.
And then what about any kind of cross promotion? What do you recommend there? Any tapping any influencers, things like that to help drive attendance and interest in the event?
Yes, so anyone who will be joining you for the webinar or who is possibly sponsoring the webinar, if you could be sure when you're doing your pre-tweets before the virtual webinar that you use relevant hashtags pertinent to them, that you tag them if they have Twitter, that you are tagging them so they can retweet you or create their own tweet to get their follower base the information so they can also sign up and register for it and join you. That's it for today's Inbox with Adrian. Please email me at hello@andersoni.com. Tweet me or slide into my DMs.
All right. Well, that's a wrap on this month's episode of Overrated and Underused. Thanks to our O&U groupies for listening in or tuning out while we were talking. But next month, we've got a riveting show for you on inaction versus action. As always, we are sponsored by Anderson Interactive and can be heard weekdays at 10 a.m., 6 p.m., 2 a.m. Eastern on Healthcare Now Radio. Email your Inbox with Adrian questions to hello@andersoni, that's the letter I.com, or tweet us at Jen_Jennings, Tom_Testa, or Adrian_Stoner. And you can follow us with the hashtag #OverUnderRadio. And I want to thank HP for sponsoring today's episode. You can learn more about HP and their Healthcare Edition products that were designed with clinicians in mind to streamline patient care and optimize clinical workflows at hp.com/go/healthcare/US.
Thanks for listening to the Overrated and Underused Show with your hosts, experienced marketers Jen Jennings and Tom Testa, and special guest Adrian Stoner. Overrated and underused.